When my daughter-in-law, Sarah, looked at me across the kitchen table and told me it was time for me to find my own place, I did not cry. I did not get angry. I did not even drop the teacup I was holding. Instead, I just looked at her tired eyes, and I smiled. It was a small, sad smile, the kind you give to a child who does not understand the weight of their words. I understand, Sarah, I said softly, my voice barely louder than the sound of the rain outside. You do not have to worry. I will pack my things. She looked surprised, perhaps even a bit relieved. She probably expected an argument, or tears, or a long lecture about family duty. But I had no energy left for arguments. For months, I had felt like a ghost walking through the hallways of my own son's house. I was there, but no one really saw me. I cooked the meals, I cleaned the floors, and I washed the clothes, but my presence was just a shadow in the background of their busy lives. That evening, my son David came home from work. I sat in the corner of the living room, folding the last batch of laundry. I watched him kiss his wife and play with his young son, Leo. He looked happy, but his eyes never drifted toward my corner. When Sarah whispered something in his ear, he glanced at me for just a second. His face showed a brief flash of guilt, but then he looked away and nodded. He did not come over to talk to me about it. He did not ask how I felt. That was the moment I realized something that broke my heart into 1,000 quiet pieces. My family did not see me as a mother or a grandmother anymore. To them, I was just a convenience, a live-in helper whose time had run out. And so, the next morning, while the house was still completely silent and the sun was just beginning to rise, I took my single suitcase and walked out the front door. I did not leave a dramatic note. I did not lock the door loudly to make a point. I just closed it with a soft click, stepped out into the cool morning air, and walked away. As I walked down the street, I realized something even more painful. They were so busy with their own world that they probably would not even notice I was gone until they looked for their breakfast. To understand how a mother can become a stranger to her own child, I have to look back at the years before the silence grew so loud. My name is Martha, and for 30 years, my entire world was my son, David. My husband passed away when David was just a little boy, leaving us with a small house and a lot of empty spaces. From that day on, I promised myself that I would give David everything he ever needed, no matter how hard I had to work. I remember the long winter nights when the house was freezing, and I would wrap him in 3 layers of blankets, staying awake just to make sure he was breathing comfortably. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices in the early morning and typing documents late into the night. My hands were always rough, and my back always ached, but whenever I looked at David's bright smile, the pain simply disappeared. He was my proudest achievement, my beautiful boy who promised he would always take care of his mother. When I grow up, Mom, I'm going to buy you a big house with a beautiful garden, he used to tell me while sitting on the kitchen counter, his face covered in chocolate. You will never have to work again. I would laugh and kiss his forehead, telling him that his happiness was the only garden I ever needed. And for a long time, we were a team. We shared our meals, our secrets, and our dreams. When he worked hard and got into a good college, I cried tears of pure joy. I stood in the back of the auditorium during his graduation, wearing my best dress, feeling like the luckiest mother in the entire world. Then, David met Sarah. Sarah was a beautiful, ambitious young woman from a wealthy family. She was smart, organized, and very focused on the future. When David brought her home for the first time, I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I cooked her favorite dishes, I cleaned the house until it shined, and I smiled until my face hurt. But from the very beginning, I felt a strange distance between us. Sarah looked at our small house with a critical eye. She spoke about career goals, investments, and modern lifestyles that I knew nothing about. I was just an old-fashioned mother who believed in homemade soup and long conversations on the porch. Slowly, I noticed that David started changing the way he spoke to me when Sarah was around. He became a bit more formal, a bit more distant, as if he was trying to prove to her that he had outgrown his humble beginnings. When they got married, they bought a large, modern house in a quiet neighborhood. It was beautiful, with high ceilings, white walls, and large windows that let in a lot of light. But to me, it felt cold, like a museum where you were afraid to touch anything. A year later, their son Leo was born. I was overjoyed. I thought that the arrival of a baby would bring us all closer together, that the shared love for a child would melt away the invisible walls that had started to grow between Sarah and me. When Leo was born, Sarah went back to her high-powered job within a few months. They needed someone to look after the baby, and they did not trust expensive nannies. David called me one evening, his voice full of the old warmth that I had missed so much. "Mom, we really need you," he had said over the phone. "Could you come live with us and help with Leo? We can't do this alone." My heart leaped with joy. I felt wanted again. I immediately sold my own small, cozy house, packed my life into a few boxes, and moved into their grand home. I told myself that this was my purpose now, to support my son and help raise my grandson. In the beginning, it felt wonderful. I woke up early to feed Leo, I sang him the same old lullabies I used to sing to David, and I kept the kitchen smelling like fresh vanilla and warm bread. But as the months turned into years, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. It happened so slowly that I didn't even notice it at first. It started with small comments from Sarah about the way I kept the house. "Martha, please don't use that dish soap, it's bad for the environment," she would say without looking up from her laptop. Or, "Martha, Leo shouldn't eat sugar. Please don't give him those traditional cookies you make." I would nod and apologize, adjusting my ways to fit her rules. I reminded myself that it was her house and her child. But then, the criticisms became more frequent, and they started happening in front of David. One evening, I accidentally left a small smudge of flour on the polished kitchen counter. Sarah sighed deeply, a sound full of intense frustration. "David, can you please talk to your mother?" she said, her voice sharp. "I work 12 hours a day, and I just want to come home to a clean house. Is that too much to ask?" David looked at me, his eyes filled with tiredness. "Mom, please just be more careful," he said softly. He didn't defend me. He didn't mention that I had spent the entire afternoon cleaning the rest of the house, washing their clothes, and taking care of a crying toddler. He just wanted peace, and the easiest way to get it was to side with his wife. Slowly, I began to realize that I was no longer a guest or a family member in that house. I was an unpaid housekeeper who was expected to be invisible when guests arrived. Whenever Sarah's friends came over for dinner parties, she would politely suggest that I take my dinner upstairs to my room so I could rest. "You've worked so hard all day, Martha, you deserve a break," she would say with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. I knew what it really meant. She was embarrassed by me. She was embarrassed by my old-fashioned clothes, my simple way of speaking, and the fact that her mother-in-law was a retired office cleaner. So, I would take my plate, go up to my small room under the roof, and listen to the laughter and music coming from downstairs. I would sit on the edge of my bed, looking at the dark sky outside, wondering how I had managed to become so completely alone while living in a house full of people. Even my relationship with little Leo began to change. As he grew older, Sarah enrolled him in expensive preschools and signed him up for endless activities. She bought him complex educational toys and forbade him from listening to the simple folk stories I loved to tell. One afternoon, I was sitting on the floor with Leo, showing him how to make paper boats out of old newspapers, just like I used to do with David. He was laughing, his little hands covered in joy. Sarah walked into the room and immediately picked up the paper boats, throwing them into the recycling bin. "Martha, we don't keep trash in the living room," she said coldly. "Leo has his developmental blocks to play with." Leo looked at me with confusion, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I couldn't even give my grandson a piece of paper without it being wrong. I looked at David, who was standing in the doorway, but he just picked up his phone and walked away into the study. He had learned to ignore the tension by pretending it didn't exist. The real breaking point came on a cold Tuesday evening in late November. It was David's 35th birthday, and I wanted to make it special. For days, I had been preparing his favorite childhood meal, a slow-cooked beef stew and a traditional apple pie that he used to love so much when he was a boy. The kitchen smelled wonderful, full of the rich, warm sense of home and memory. I had spent hours standing on my aching legs, peeling vegetables, rolling out the pastry, and setting the table with the nice tablecloth. I felt a rare spark of excitement in my heart. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this dinner would remind David of who we used to be. Maybe it would remind him of the nights we sat together in our tiny kitchen, laughing and sharing dreams. At 7 o'clock, the front door opened. David and Sarah walked in, but they were not alone. They had brought 3 of David's colleagues from work, including his boss. They were all dressed in expensive suits, talking loudly about stock markets and corporate promotions. When Sarah walked into the kitchen and saw the pots of stew and the apple pie, her face turned pale with anger. She pulled me into the pantry, her voice a sharp, furious whisper. "Martha, what is this?" she demanded, gesturing toward the food. "I told you we were going out for dinner to celebrate. Didn't you check the shared digital calendar?" I don't know how to use the digital calendar, Sarah, I stammered, my heart sinking into my shoes. I wanted to make David his favorite meal. It's his birthday. "This is completely embarrassing," Sarah said, her teeth clenched. "We are trying to impress David's boss tonight. We can't serve him a heavy, old-fashioned peasant stew. We have reservations at a 5-star French restaurant downtown." David walked into the kitchen to grab some wine glasses. He saw me standing there, looking small and defeated next to the big pot of stew. "David," I said softly, my voice trembling just a little. "I made your favorite apple pie." He looked at the pie, and for a second, I saw a flicker of sadness in his eyes. But then he looked at Sarah, who was glaring at him with crossed arms. He let out a long, tired sigh. "Mom, you really should have asked Sarah first," he said, his voice flat and empty of any warmth. "We have important plans tonight. Just put the food in the fridge. We'll eat it some other time." They left a few minutes later. The big house became instantly silent again, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood alone in the beautiful, spotless kitchen. I looked at the table I had set so carefully, and then I looked at the massive pot of stew that no one wanted. A single tear finally escaped my eye and ran down my wrinkled cheek, landing on the warm crust of the apple pie. I didn't put the food in the fridge. Instead, I packed it into small containers, put on my old coat, and walked down the street to a local homeless shelter. I gave the warm stew and the fresh apple pie to the people there. They thanked me with wide, grateful smiles. They held my hands and told me how wonderful it smelled. It was a strange feeling. I had to walk out of my own son's house to find someone who appreciated my care. When I returned to the house, it was past midnight. David and Sarah were back, sitting at the kitchen island, drinking wine. They didn't ask where I had been. They didn't ask why I had left the house so late. Sarah just looked up, her expression cold and completely detached. "Martha, since we are all up, we need to have a serious talk," she said, setting her wine glass down with a soft click. I sat down on the chair across from them. My legs felt very heavy, and my heart felt completely numb. "We've been thinking about the future," Sarah continued, her voice sounding like a business manager delivering a performance review. "Leo is growing up, and he needs his own study room. The guest room you are using is the only room that fits the criteria. And honestly, Martha, with our busy schedules and the way we like to manage our home, we think it would be better for everyone if you found your own place. A small senior apartment nearby would be much more suitable for your needs." I looked at David. I waited for him to say something. I waited for him to say, "No, Sarah, this is my mother. She gave up her life for me. She sold her house to help us. She stays here." But David just stared down at his wine glass, turning it slowly between his fingers. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "David?" I whispered, my voice holding the final, fragile thread of my hope. "Sarah is right, Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's just, things are too crowded here. It's for the best. We will help you look for a nice place next month." That was the moment the final chord broke. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel like screaming. A strange, calm clarity washed over me. I realized that my presence in this house was not just unappreciated, it was a burden to the person I loved most in the world. My son had chosen his new life, his new status, and his peace of mind over his mother. And I loved him too much to force him to choose again. I understand, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice completely steady. You do not have to worry. I will pack my things. I did not wait for the next month. I did not wait for them to find a senior apartment that met Sarah's approval. I knew that if I stayed for another weeks, the silence would completely destroy what was left of my spirit. I woke up at 5 o'clock the next morning. The sun was not yet visible, and the sky was a deep, beautiful shade of blue. The house was completely still. I packed my single suitcase with my clothes, my old family photographs, and the few books I owned. I didn't take anything that they had bought for me. I wanted to leave exactly as I came, quietly and with nothing but my memories. Before I closed my suitcase, I walked into Leo's room. He was sleeping peacefully, his little hand tucked under his cheek. I leaned down and kissed his warm forehead very gently, making sure not to wake him. Grow up well, my sweet boy, I whispered into the dark room. Remember that your grandmother loves you very much. Then, I walked down the grand staircase for the last time. I passed the kitchen counter, which was perfectly clean and empty. I didn't leave a note explaining my feelings or accusing them of selfishness. They knew what they had done, and a note would only make them feel angry instead of reflective. I just wanted to leave with dignity. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp, cool morning air, and closed the door behind me. The click of the lock was the loudest sound in the quiet street. I pulled my suitcase behind me, walking away from the big, beautiful house that had never truly been a home. I spent the first few weeks in a small, cheap motel near the train station while I looked for a place to live. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't have to worry about smudging a counter or using the wrong dish soap. I could breathe. Soon, I found a lovely little apartment on the second floor of an old brick building in a lively part of the city. It had a small balcony where I could put pots of geraniums, and a kitchen that was just big enough for one person. It was cozy, warm, and filled with light. I bought some second-hand furniture, put up my old family photos, and filled the rooms with plants. The most amazing thing happened after I left. My son and his wife didn't even notice I was gone for the first 2 days. I know this because David didn't call me until Thursday evening, a full 36 hours after I had walked out the door. When the phone rang, I sat on my new sofa, looking at his name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered it. Mom? David's voice sounded confused, with a hint of irritation. Where are you? Sarah went to your room to ask where you put the dry cleaning, and your things are gone. Are you staying at a friend's house? No, David, I said, my voice completely calm and peaceful. I moved out. I am in my own apartment now. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breath catching in his throat. You moved out? Without telling us? Why would you do that? Because it was time, David, I replied softly. You and Sarah asked me to leave, and I didn't want to make things difficult for you. I wanted you to have your house back. But Mom, we said next month, he stammered, his voice suddenly sounding young and defensive. We were going to help you look. You can't just vanish like that. What will people say? What will my friends think? I felt a wave of gentle sadness for him. Even now, his first worry was about appearances and what his friends would think, not about how his elderly mother had managed to move her entire life alone. It doesn't matter what people think, David, I said gently. I am safe. I am happy. I love you, but it is better this way. Before he could say anything else, I told him I had to go, and I hung up the phone. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because I realized that the conversation would only lead to empty excuses and false promises, and I was finally done with both. 6 months have passed since that quiet morning I walked away. My life looks very different now. I have joined a local community center where I teach traditional baking classes to young people once a week. I have made friends with my neighbors, an elderly couple who often invite me over for tea and long chats on their balcony. My hands are still rough, and my back still aches from time to time, but my heart is completely at peace. David calls me every couple of weeks. The conversations are short, mostly about his work or little Leo's school. He sounds more polite now, a bit more respectful, as if he has finally realized that his mother is an independent person, not just a fixture in his house. Sometimes he asks if I want to come over for dinner, but I always politely decline. I tell him that I am too busy with my classes or my friends. I know it sounds harsh, but I do it to protect the peace I have fought so hard to find. I love my son with every single beat of my heart, nothing can ever change that. I do not hold any anger toward him or Sarah. They are just living their lives the best way they know how, caught up in the modern rush for success and perfection. I forgive them completely. But I have also learned a very important lesson in my old age, a lesson that I want to share with anyone who is listening to my voice right now. Love is not about erasing yourself to make someone else comfortable. You can love your children with all your heart, but you must never let your love become a carpet for them to walk on. Being a mother means giving your children roots to grow and wings to fly, but it does not mean becoming their shadow when they no longer need your light. If you ever find yourself in a place where your presence is ignored, where your love is treated as a chore, and where your kindness is taken for granted, do not stay and fight for a space that is no longer yours. Have the courage to smile, pack your suitcase, and walk away with dignity. It is better to live in a single, empty room filled with your own peace than to live in a grand mansion where you are completely invisible. Your worth does not depend on how much someone else appreciates you. You are valuable simply because you exist, because you have loved, and because you still have so much warmth to give to the world. Thank you for listening to my story. May your home always be filled with real warmth, may your loved ones always see the true value of your presence, and may you always have the quiet strength to choose your own peace. Take care of yourselves, and remember that you are never truly alone.